Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to show 9 of In the Zone. It's amazing that we've gotten off the ground and now we have our ninth show going today. I want to thank MV Pete Coles for being my ride along guy. A lot to talk about today, Pete. A lot to do. We're going to start right off in the zone with the Feed 'em Fish section. And right now, we're going to jump right into the Bob Huggins controversy that has occurred just recently in the past few days with Mr. Huggins, Coach Huggins, being on a radio show and dropping a couple of very, very insensitive remarks on that show. I wanted to just speak about it briefly. We're not going to bring up the comments that Mr. Huggins said. There's no need to further offend people. But West Virginia has kind of scrambled, and Coach Huggins has kind of scrambled with an apology. But the remarks in a public forum were just absolutely appalling, and it's just it pales. And it does not dignify the coaching profession when things like this occur. And I wanted to get into this just a little bit because it upset me a little bit, not because of what he said, but it was because of the way West Virginia handled it. So because of the incendiary remarks, West Virginia came out and fined Coach Huggins $1 million, suspended him for 3 games, and now he will also have to undergo some LGBTQ training that's somewhere founded in West Virginia somewhere. So those were the real 3 provisions that they put out. The $1 million fine is absolutely a zero penalty. Okay, instead of coaching the team for $3 million this year, he'll have to do it for 2. I don't really see how that's a big penalty. The second piece of it is now we're going to suspend him for 3 games. I don't know who came up with that number. I'm not sure that's sufficient. It doesn't really matter to me that they punish him, to be honest with you, because they decided to stay with him. So there's a certain amount of complicity with the university if they decide to stay with him. The president, G, the athletic director, they have all had various meetings over the past days about what to do with this. And basically what happens is it's a similar situation to the one with Coach Boeheim, where when they didn't want him to coach the team anymore, but they didn't want to anger him as well so that they could move forward. Coach Huggins has a significant cachet in West Virginia, and West Virginia University didn't want to mess with that. West Virginia has a really good team coming back next year, and word is that Coach Huggins was disciplined and fired, that many of the current players would leave, and some of the current players that were coming in would not attend. And so the athletic director and the president are really faced with a really difficult situation there about what to do with a coach who's on radio blasting out incendiary comments, and then what do they have to do about it? Here's what I wish they would have done. I wish they would have done absolutely nothing to him. Because to be honest with you, as we've talked about on this show before, life has inherent penalty and life has inherent reward. The inherent penalty shows up when you're saying incendiary things at the age that you are, and you haven't evolved as a human being into saying something a little bit more intelligent and something less critical of human beings. And I'll tell you that a lot of the coaches, including myself, our language wasn't always great, in the back of the day. But there was a point in my life, and I think it had something to do with getting married and being around such a beautiful person such as my wife. I think something happened to me where I examined some of the things that were being said, and I said, why do you say them? And when I looked at everything, what caused me to change my mind was because about talking in certain ways was because most of the things are harmful and hurtful to people. And that's not necessary to do. He was trying to be funny. He was trying to be glib. But in the process, he wound up hurting millions of people's feelings. And that's not cool. And so, like, life has inherent penalties. I wish they wouldn't have penalized him, because just sitting and stewing in what he did yesterday, I think that's a lot. But in terms of the fake penalties that West Virginia decided to put on him, that's where I kind of draw the line a little bit. Don't put any penalties on if you're going to do this, because this is nothing. You're not doing anything to this man that's going to impede or stop him from making these comments in the past. Any kind of LGBTQ training you want to undergo here, you can applaud all of that you want and everything like that, but the water is already under this bridge. And I think there's been a number of different instances with Coach Huggins, in the past, which he's had some issues with with driving under the influence and some other things like that. I just wish these coaches would understand that they need to be role models and they need to be better at it. And taking apart people for religious beliefs or taking apart people for their who they love. I mean, that's really, really beneath the pale to me in this day and age. I mean, we should have grown a little bit from there. And so I want to hammer West Virginia a little bit for this. And I want to hammer Coach Huggins as well, because I think that this is just beyond the pale. And you can apologize all you want when you say stuff like that, but that's, if you say things like that in the closet of a room, that's different, you know. But going on to a national radio show and saying something with that, with having the just nonsense to say something like that. I just thought it'd be a good place for us to start, Pete, because it doesn't really, you know, there are so many, so many. The English language is such a vast array of words. We can pick and choose our words and seem to be intellectual and intelligent at the same time.
Whatever happened to sticks and stones, though? Come on. You know, he's a moron, and if the market sees fit to throw him out, that's fine. But it's like sticks and stones, folks. Like, I take a lot of grief about my size, and I always have since I was a kid. Took a lot of grief about it. Did I go crawling up into a ball because of it? No. Did any of the people that supposedly now are offended? No. They got on with their lives, but there should be some sort of a penalty, right? Because he was stupid.
It was stupid, you know, and what he said was not intelligent. And we're in the business of college.
You should have called them cranks.
We're in the business of college, you know, and so I just don't think that. I just don't associate with that because it's not necessary. You know, ad hominem attacks in any way in general just doesn't portend to me to be an intelligent person.
But here's the other thing too about that is, they said nothing about his attack on religion. They just said his attack on the LGBTQ community, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
he's attacking religion too. So what's hello?
Yeah,
he attacked multiple groups there, folks.
Yeah, and I think his comment, you know, was doubly embarrassing that way as well.
It was just stupid.
But
I mean,
I just think that in the whole spectrum of things, a little courage is necessary sometimes too, to send the right message. And you know, 3 games, $1 million, you know, for a guy that probably makes $3 or $4 million every single year, that's not that big a deal.
The bigger thing is if he loses a contract with a sportswear company or a shoe company, because then he'll lose his players too.
That certainly could happen.
That's where the marketplace
And
determines
then,
his fate.
You know, I think that part of it is also maybe because of some of the way that you know, the way that things are right now with the scale being so busy and everything moving back and forth. By tomorrow, we'll be talking about something different. And if he just goes out and hides out for a little while, most of this will pass. But I'll tell you where it really, really comes into play is because his team is going to go out on the road next year, and his team is going to go play in some arenas, and they're going to draw a lot of scrutiny, and they're going to draw an awful lot of bad attention to his team because of this. They'll be booed in every single arena that they go into now. That's what you've done with your players at West Virginia.
I have a feeling this is all, by the time next season happens, this is all going to be gone.
I hope so for their sake, but I don't really think so. I think that the fans will definitely, especially if West Virginia has to go in and play Xavier, the school that was really being talked about, or West Virginia has to play Notre Dame or any of those other schools that are of that religious affiliation, I don't think their fan base is going to react too well to that. And I think the funny thing is, too, today, some of these things live on because they have memes and all this other stuff on social media. I'd be careful if I was Coach Hug because I think you can become known for the wrong thing, and
That's
that stuff
true.
that can kind of stick around. So again, first card out, feed them fish. A little bit of a depressing message.
A heavy
there.
right off the bat.
I'm sorry with that, people. I'm really sorry about that, but I did want to address it. I did want to talk about
Absolutely.
it, and I did want to opine on it. Okay, so let's get back into basketball stuff. All right, the Celtics right now in the middle of the playoffs. We talked last year about coaching. We talked last week about coaching. We've talked about coaching all the time, and one of the things that's underestimated in the game is that there are a very few group of gentlemen in this game that can actually coach at the highest level. And what the Celtics are enduring right now is because in the middle of them having to lose their coach and then having to scramble and find a new coach, they went and found an interim coach in Missoula, but then also gave him the job full-time as well. And so I think right now you're seeing some of that. Kenny Smith, Barkley, the whole crew were on his case pretty hard the other day. A couple of people in his favor saying, "Hey, they didn't get a good shot off, but that's not the coach's fault." And it's not so much that they didn't get a shot off; it was the way that they proceeded to it. So if you go back in time, if you look at it, you have 11 seconds. When you have 11 seconds and you're losing the game, Kenny Smith alluded to this on the TV the other night. You have to take a quick shot, because if you don't take a quick shot and you miss, the game is over. And so what happened to them, except Marcus Smart didn't get the shot off in time, was they didn't approach it well-coached team. First off, if I'm coaching that team, I call timeout in that situation if I have a timeout. He had a timeout. He decided not to use it. He wanted to let his players' talent and his players' freedom and athleticism show, and they got burned for it, because even Marcus Smart, and even though the ball went in at the end, he's not the person that the Celtics want taking that last shot in the game. So
yeah, but don't you try to set your players up? Like, you take the timeout in that spot to give them a reset, and just to say, all right, guys, take a deep breath here. Here's what we want to accomplish, and then you send them back out on the floor. It's not so much to let your player. Your guys have talent, right? That's why you pay them. But
sure.
The coaching part is know enough to give them a reset, and just say, okay, guys, here's what we want to accomplish, and it gives them a chance to step back out of the moment, out of the heat of the moment, and go, okay, we have to get that up really fast.
That's what the timeout does.
Yeah,
the timeout. If you're in the business of coaching, you'll know the timeout is a multifaceted operation. Okay, so in that situation, when you're down 11, you need to call timeout, and you need to prepare the team for several scenarios, not just one. You need to prepare them for, okay, we're going to be down by X amount of points now is 11 seconds. We're going to run this play. We're going to take this quick shot, and if that doesn't happen and go well for us, we're going to go back and we're going to foul immediately. If the ball goes in and now we're leading, this is how we want to proceed on to the next play.
Right.
And even then to say, okay, look, now we're out of timeouts. So in the end of it, if we happen to have a third act in this whole thing, we score with 11 seconds to go. They come back down and score with 7 seconds to go. Now we've got 5 seconds to go, but we don't have a timeout. You better have that next play called as well. That's what I'm talking about in the intricacies of coaching. When you get into those last-minute situations, I've seen college coaches that make millions of dollars that I'm watching the TV and I'm banging my head off my living room table saying, you cannot operate at this late time of the game like that. I'll give you an example. You're down by 3 points with 45 seconds left in the game. You have no choice but to foul immediately. In that situation, I've watched coaches allow the clock for the opponent has the ball, and now they're going to run the clock down the 30 seconds they have. So the 45 seconds left they have, they're going to shoot the ball at like 25-second mark, which leaves you 20 seconds, but you're down by 3. If they score and you go down by 5 and you go down by 6, it's almost game over. And I've watched coaches do this time and time again. You absolutely need to be able to control that clock and be able to favor that clock towards your team when you're losing. When you're winning, the object is to keep that clock moving as fluidly as possible, which means we don't foul on defense. We don't do anything to stop the clock. We just let the clock keep running. In the NBA, there's so many stops of the clock, with the 24-second clock. It stops here, it stops there. You can move the ball everywhere after a timeout. So those things are a little bit different. But the playoffs so far have been good. I just wanted to start off and feed them fish with the Celtics. Unfortunately, you're losing that series right now, and I think your team is in a bit of disarray also. I don't think you have a very, very good vibration about what's going on with your team right now, and I think that has to do with the lack of confidence in the coaching staff as well. And so when you go and you say we're an NBA franchise, the Boston Celtics, and we want to have the best of the best of the best, when you have a situation with the coach that you did, when you had to fire him or let him go in the situation that you did, you should have had a better backup band ready. You should have had a better plan B in mind. If we do this, what happens next? And that's where I think a lot of the leadership goes wrong in a lot of situations these days. What do we do once that happens? And if you don't have, it's just like an athletic director. They come in and they're 0-28 for the season. And they say, okay, we got to fire the coach now. now, and everybody goes in, they get excited about firing a coach, but then they don't get excited about what are we going to do next? How are we going to change this?
Right.
What are the cultural changes? What are the norm changes that we're going to make? What are the resource investments that we're going to make in this thing that are actually going to make it better? They don't look at it that way. I don't know how they get to where they get, some of these people, but when they look at it that way, I just can't help but think that a lot of the people in these jobs just don't see the clarity of the position that they're in.
They're in the moment, but they're not thinking long term.
They're not able to understand what the consequence of their actions will be. And so when you can't understand the consequence of your actions, it's very, very difficult to forge the new way forward because you didn't even understand the actions and the consequences of those actions. You know, by firing a coach, you sit there and say, who are we going to get? And then say, is that markedly better than what we're doing right now?
Does it fit the locker room that we have right now?
And that's what we did, Pete, when we did the grading
You're
on
right,
the
yeah.
coaching hires. We said, wow, this is a D because you had a guy who was pretty good, but your program's not very good. And you had a guy who was doing okay in your program, but you had somebody else tell you that you can be much better. Now you fired the guy, and you're in a worse situation than you were before.
I was just about to say that. I was like, I remember this conversation.
We had this conversation. It happens on all different levels. I wanted to go into the playoffs just a little bit, though, where we're at with the playoffs and what's going on. But before we do that, I want to make mention of something that happened in the NCAA this week, and it is really, really just blowing my mind how we're continuing not to address this problem, allowing it to grow, allowing it to fester. Okay, last week, Kansas University had the opportunity to sign one of the best big men that is available who transferred and put himself in the portal, Hunter Dickinson, out of Michigan. Okay, now, Hunter, I want to give him credit for this because he played his cards tremendously well here. All right. He said he announced he was leaving. He put his name in the portal. That allowed him to take some extra visits to schools that he wanted to go. He took the visits and then he let it marinate. And what I mean by let it marinate was he started to talk to those schools about the deals that he had from the other schools. So Maryland, with his former high school coach on staff, Kevin Willard, making a move at Maryland because the young man was from that area. They went hard and tried to bring him in there. A lot of people thought that he would attend there because of those connections. But the young man just kept waiting and waiting and waiting. And then different schools came in. And what happens is now you're seeing what happens when they really, really want somebody. They're only going to wind up going to the highest bidder.
Yeah,
and
bidding war.
that is
Yeah.
absolutely damaging for the game. Kansas paid $2 million for this young man.
He's basically a pro player.
He's basically
Right? He's basically a pro player.
he's
That's a rookie contract.
He's making more money than half of the coaches in the NCAA right now.
Yeah, but he's an
Maybe
NBA
more.
rookie. That's a rookie contract in the NBA.
It's pretty close.
Yeah.
It's pretty close. He will not get that kind of contract in the NBA.
Well,
I'll go out on a limb
but
right now and say after next year in the draft, if we're still around and we're still doing our draft next year, I guarantee you that won't be one of our top 15 picks.
But-
and he will not be in a $2 million contract range.
But again, he's smart. Now, if he gets injured, right, or whatever, finishes season, gets injured, whatever, he's got the money now. And he
Very true.
And with a smart investment plan, he can make that work.
Very true. But here's the piece that I want to raise. Here's the piece that I want to send the alarm on.
Okay.
You had two programs, players in their programs now being investigated for gambling
Oh,
in
jeez.
Iowa and Iowa State. Two programs this week where their players are now being investigated for gambling. You can gamble all over the place right now. It's legal just about everywhere. That's a problem when you get into college basketball.
Right here.
Because I started to have, you can pick it right up on your phone. They'll give you $200 to start your account. They'll give you all
Exactly.
sorts of incentives. Here's where it's problematic. Back in the day, point shaving had all of these different pieces moving. You needed to have a couple of gangsters, you needed to have some players who had fallen on hard luck, and you needed maybe a couple of referees from time to time to make things work when you were actually going to shave points in a game, which means when the point spread comes out in Las Vegas, you're attempting to fix that game.
Yep.
Okay?
Yeah, sure.
Probably the worst thing that can happen in sports. is when people start to feel that it's rigged, but also that the line where they bet their hard-earned dollars wasn't actually a line. They weren't actually gambling. You were just part of a fix. And if you had the right side of it, you were lucky. And if you had the wrong side of it, you lost your money. And so here's what I see happening with NIL. With young men now being investigated for gambling in sports, what is going to stop the $2 million player? And I'm not saying this young man at all, but I'm saying what's going to stop somebody from doing their own point shaving?
Right.
You bet on, you have $2 million. You bet $200,000 on your game.
Oh, jeez.
Why not?
Yeah.
Okay. You have a third intermediary, your roommate, and you say to him, hey, the game's in tonight. We're going to put the money on. So his name doesn't go on it. It's not the young man who's betting on the game, but somebody else triangulates it out. And now you have their own money doing it. They don't have to triangulate out. They don't have to go to people and now
They
I'm
don't
in
need
trouble.
a criminal influence.
You don't need to triangulate it. You can just go do it yourself. This is what's happening in the NIL. This is what's going on in the game. There's 2,000 people in the portal out of a total of like 4,000. You have 59 coaching changes. You have all of these metrics and all of these numbers pointing the wrong way. The only thing that points the right way is the dollar figure. And that's the thing that's going right for the NCAA right now. That's about the only thing that's going right, though. So I wanted to go back into a couple of little different fun facts here that I picked up during the week. I'm going to give you the back end of this, Pete, because I'm going to quiz you again this week. I'm going to give you a quiz right now, okay? In a 2 playoff game series, in only 2 playoff games, the 2 players with the most points, I'm going to give them to you because I don't think you'd get the second guy if I asked you to spend a lot of time here. I could spend 100 years here. I wouldn't have guessed this guy's name. You would certainly get the first name. But then I'm going to give you the 2 guys who almost broke that record. I'm going to let you try and pick those 2 guys that are currently in the playoffs right now, and they almost broke the record. I believe, and again, I can get fact-checked on this, hopefully. We're going to call them CPs, and I'll explain that a little bit later. Because I was also told that Angel Reese is not Angela Reese. And so when I was on the show, I called her Angela Reese, and I'll explain the CP a little bit later, but we're going to call them CPs here. CLPs, okay? So the playoff scoring in 2 games, all right? The first 2 players that still have the record are Michael Jordan and Orlando Woolridge. They have 171 total points, I believe. All right, now there's 2 players in the playoffs right now who almost broke that record, came very, very close to breaking that record. Who are they?
I'm looking at the offensive leaders here on the NBA postseason stats because I didn't want to try to
You're cheating.
Google down. Well, because I'm not watching a lot of basketball. I'm dealing with some other stuff right now. So I wouldn't think it's the top 2 average leaders. I'm thinking Kawhi and Anthony Edwards. That's my guess.
They have to be on the same team.
Oh, same team.
They have to be teammates.
Oh, jeez. I have no idea.
I'll give it to you.
No idea.
Kevin Durant
Okay.
and Booker from Phoenix.
Really? Okay.
168.
So Booker's leading the postseason stats.
Yeah, he's playing unbelievable right now. We'll get into some of that in a little bit. Another bad fact for the Celtics is that they are 0-3 in playoff games this year when the game has been decided by 4 points or less. That's another coaching indicator. Okay, we talked about Hunter Dickinson and his $2 million deal. Good for Hunter. I just think it's bad for the game.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's like, so now the NCAA has become a developmental league.
It's certainly a G League. I don't know
So,
what comes
yeah.
after GH. It's an H League.
Developmental. It's just another developmental league. So let's call that AA.
No question. No question. Okay, I got a question that came last week. We didn't get this one out, and it comes from Alan Blair. And the question is, should the 3-point line be changed or eliminated? That's a great question. Back in my earlier times, I would have said, let's get rid of it. I played without it, and it definitely changed, and then I played with it, and it definitely changed the way that I was as a player. And
Change strategy.
it changes strategy. It also changes the way you operate as a player. It changed the way that I was actually as a player. I was a much better player going into the rim, shooting closer shots and getting around the basket and using my speed. And then when the three-point line came in, I was like, wow, this is 3 points. It looks pretty good. But it made me into a different type of player and not as good a player in my assessment. So in order to answer Alan's question, I don't think it's ever going away. Would I have liked to have seen it gone away? I certainly would, because I consider myself a basketball purist. I don't think it will go away. Here's the one thing I might want to see them do. Maybe a little uniformity, or maybe just stop moving the line as much as they've been moving it. The college line has moved like 3 different times. I think it's too far right now. I'd love to see them go back to 19-9, which it was originally. And then the NBA line is way, way out there, and that's different too. So I'd like to see a little uniformity. I believe the women's line is a different line as well. And so that's why when you go onto a basketball court, it looks like you're going all through these different lines, and it's just mesmerizing almost when you go in there and you're starting to watch games. So we're going to talk a little bit also today. We're just going to bounce all over the place today, Pete, but we're going in between college, in between pro. The list for the combine came out, and I thought it was very, very interesting. Some of the names on the list that they had: Kobe Brown from Missouri is going to be there. Noah Clowney from Alabama has been invited. Now, what this means also is you've been invited. It does not mean that you will attend. It means that you've been given an invitation, and that's really cool too. But there will be some people that do not attend, I believe. I'm not sure. We'll talk about that at the end, but there are some great names on here. The league and the G League have combined a little bit here. They've invited some of the overtime elite players. They've invited some of the G League players. I think that's really, really cool. This starts on the 15th. The first couple of days are more like testing that they do, where they run vertical jump tests and do all sorts of different testing on them athletically. And then they'll start to mix it up and play in the latter part of the week. So I'm real excited about that. There's some really good names on this list that we had in the top of our draft. Zach Edey's been invited. We have Taylor Hendricks, who we think's pretty good. Gigi Jackson is going to be there. Our man from UConn, Adamo Sanaga, is going to be there. Andre Jackson is going to be there. The Thompson twins have been invited, as has been Scoot Jackson. So it will be interesting to see if any of them attend. If they do, I'd be real excited to watch them play against the best of the best in the NCAA and see if they can prove themselves. The one name that was not on this list, of course, I doubt that he would attend even if invited, is Victor Wembanyama, who's slated to be the #1 pick overall. Going into a little bit of NBA and NCAA mix, we have a couple of commits this week that I thought were kind of interesting. I like the coach at USC. I like what they've done out there. I think he runs a really good program. I think his players really, really interact well with him, and I think he's an excitable guy on the sidelines. I like it, but he interacts very nicely with his players. So out at USC, you have LeBron James's son,
I was going
Bronny.
to say that because that's where my nephew committed for film school. So he's going to be watching LeBron's son.
Bronny has decided to commit to USC. And what happens there also is I talked to some of the players that I recruit as well, and I said this to a young man named Donald Foyle when I recruited him at Colgate. I said, if you declare that you're coming to Colgate, I'm going to be able to tell so many other players about that, and we're going to be able to put together an unbelievable recruiting class.
Yeah.
So when Bronny James decides to go to USC, DJ Rodman, who is Dennis Rodman's son, decides to follow him as well. So Washington State lost DJ Rodman, but Dennis Rodman and LeBron James's son will both play at USC this year, and I think that'll be interesting.
Yep.
I do want to just jump into this thing with Bronny, though, because there's this talk about him joining LeBron in the NBA and being in that situation and being, in that situation where a father and son team. I don't know that that's ever occurred in the NBA before. That might be something to look at. But I think also you have a situation where I think there's a lot of pressure on this young man, and I just don't see him have the same physical attributes his dad does. I think the younger son might be a better pro prospect, but I'm just going to go out on a limb. I like watching the young man play. He plays with a lot of enthusiasm, so I'm excited to watch him play at USC. As far as him being one and done and joining his dad in Los Angeles Lakers outfit next year, I would not hold my breath for that. Joe Girard, a local guy from New York outside in Albany, scored a lot of points out in Albany. He was at Syracuse, and he is going to transfer to Clemson. Clemson brought in 4 transfers this week, so the portal keeps spinning. One thing I would like to also bring up today, I would like to just spend a minute on the show to offer up condolences to the Crum family. Denny Crum, the great coach at Louisville, passed this week. He was an incredible basketball coach. He had incredible basketball teams, and as a young man growing up, I loved watching Louisville and a couple of the Mount Vernon players that went up there and all the great stuff that happened there. I loved watching Louisville, and Coach Crum was really he was a disciple of John Wooden, and he really had a great sideline demeanor to him. I thought he was a great gentleman of the game, and I thought he had a great impact on the game. So I think he'll be missed. I know that. I was at Madison Square Garden when I saw what I considered to be one of the greatest upsets of all time, when a fiery little coach named Jim Valvano was running around the sidelines with his team at Iona. They invited Louisville into Madison Square Garden when I believe Louisville was close to #1 in the country, and Iona beat them pretty good. So it was exciting to be at that game. Because it's just, as a young man watching that, it was almost like being at the Indiana game when Indiana played St. John's, and Indiana was #1 in the country, Bobby Knight, that type of environment. It's what the Holiday Festival and some of those tournaments in Madison Square Garden, that's where they used to be great. I know everybody wants to go to the Bahamas now, and everybody wants to go to all these different places, but some of those tournaments have such great tradition, such great attribute. So with that being said, I think we've kind of slipped around here a little bit, but I want to jump into the NBA playoffs right now, Pete.
And we're halfway home.
We're halfway home, but this is gonna take up a little bit of the block, because we have 4 series that are tied at 3-2. We have 4 NBA series that are tied at 3-2. Now, the one problem the NBA has is they can't have, they can't have Game 6 Dick Bavetta do all 4 games. So what the old riddle was about, if the NBA wants a game to go 7, who do they assign to the game? And it was Dick Bavetta, the old official. So I can't get Dick Bavetta. They can't get Dick Bavetta in all 4 of these cities right now. But I think what the NBA is watching right now is a little bit of a renaissance of itself, where some of the older players, such as LeBron James, Anthony Davis, are still holding court, and a lot of the young players in this league are really talented and really exciting. I think if you're an NBA person that's looking down at a 5-year plan and a 10-year plan, Jason Tatum and Giannis Antetokounmpo, some of those great young players going to be around for a while. I think that's exciting for the league. I think right now what's happening in the playoffs is you have a couple of really good series going on, but I think they're not really all set to go the way that everybody thought they would go.
Interesting how many blowouts there were in the first series, in the first round of playoffs, and now how tight these are in the second round.
Much tighter. You're not seeing those big leads, but you have seen a couple of times where teams have gotten down, and it's just not the same comebacks as they are in the regular season, because the home crowd is into it. The team that's there is playing well, and what's really surprised me is there's this thing about in our business of people don't like to watch the NBA because nobody plays any defense. And that's pretty true, And I think it's one of the reasons that I don't consider LeBron James to be one of the greatest of all time, is because I don't think his defensive abilities are well respected in the league, and I certainly don't think he spends a lot of time worrying about his defense. So it's one of the reasons that I have to hold him back, I think. Michael Jordan was an all-defensive player for many years, and I think that matters. I think playing hard on both sides of the basketball matters. But what you're also seeing is this unbelievable offensive ability of the players out on the floor right now. And one of the things I was looking at, I was kind of surprised at the way some of the things turned out. I think I told you the Lakers were going to be good. I think I told you the Nuggets would handle their business. I thought the Heat would beat the Knicks, and they are. But I didn't really see the Celtics dissolving like the Alka-Seltzer that they are right now. They're pop fizz right now. So let's go over to the Knicks and the Heat right now. They're 3-2. Game 6 is going to be played on Friday. Good game. they've had a really good series. Jimmy Butler's really been carrying the Heat, but what we're going to talk about in a few minutes is the depth charts of these teams. And when you sit there and say, why is the Heat being so successful right now as opposed to some of these other teams? I really didn't have a good answer. What I did was I went in and I researched a little bit of this, and I wanted to come up with the best answer I could give the audience. And so what we're looking at here is depth charts. What we're looking at here is, okay, when in the NBA, you look at everybody's starting five. Everybody has a lot of weapons in their starting five. I think what's deciding this series is 6, 7, and 8. The players that come off the bench for each respective team, how they're coming off the bench, how they're playing right now, how they're being utilized by their coaching staffs, I think has been the difference in this series. Because when I looked at the depth charts and I listed all of the starters down the line for all of these teams that still remain, you sit there and say, wow, that's a lot of balanced talent. You know, when you have the Nuggets, they have Jokic, you know, and then you have the Suns have Kevin Durant. You know, and then the Lakers have LeBron and the Warriors have Steph Curry, you know, and so those things are counterbalances. And so how do you throw things out of balance? I think it's with your depth, and I think that's what's happening right now, and I think it's a pretty good point we can pick up on. Celtics 76ers, the Sixers are up 3-2 as well. The game 6 is back in Philadelphia. That's a problem for the Celtics. And the way they played the other night at home, I'd be very, very concerned about this team going on the road. I think that they'll be able to recalibrate a little bit, as the Warriors did the other night. But I'm not sure it's too late because they're playing in Philly right now, and that crowd's going to be hostile. And if you've watched the games recently, when Joel Embiid plays well, there's nothing they can do to stop him. There's nothing. They don't have anybody that's really capable of knocking him back a step. And then when you have Harden and Maxey and these other players coming in, I think the 76ers are better than people think. So when we get over to the Nuggets and the Suns, that series, you know, has been really, really interesting because it started out 2-0. The Suns came back and fought, tied it up at 2-2, but now they're down 3-2, and they're going to come back to Phoenix for a Game 6. But the Nuggets are playing very, very well, and getting that game at home, you know, by holding home court, that they've been able to stay strong in this series. I would not rule out Phoenix, though, because their offensive abilities, if they go to DeAndre Ayton a little bit more, get him more touches, I think they're going to be even more of a significance. Because if you watched the Warriors the other night, we'll talk about that in a second, but their complementary players came out and played great. That made it easier for the other players. Jalen Brunson had an unbelievable game for the Knicks the other day. I criticized the whole Knick operation because I thought there was too much Jalen Brunson. But now that Julius Randle's back and Brunson's there, they're kind of helping each other to work together to be that juggernaut. But Jalen Brunson's had a couple of great games there too. But now we go over to the Lakers and the Warriors, you know, and you sit there and say, wow, LeBron James, his legs look pretty young to me. Load management might have worked, you know. And Anthony Davis is playing great right now. I haven't seen him move around with this type of agility and this type of bounce in a while. He seems to be really healthy, which I think has been a problem for him over the time. But he's playing really good basketball right now. They're up 3-2. Game 6 is, you know, going back to L.A. because that's what's happened with these highest seed teams. They've given up their advantage, and now they face elimination, possibly into Game 6. Phoenix is going to play on their home court, so that's a little bit of advantage for them. But I think right now what you're seeing is we're going to go into the depth charts right now, and this is the players, in my mind, that are making the difference for these teams that are now winning over the teams that are losing. When you look at the Knicks and when you look at the Heat, okay, you have the Knicks with Brunson, Barrett, Julius Randle, Mitchell Robinson, Quentin Grimes, Quickly and Toppin. Quickly and Toppin have not been playing great off the bench. Now go over to the Heat where they start with Lowry, Butler, Max Strus, Kevin Love, and Bam Adebayo. That and the Knicks can handle that. The Knicks can go with that. Where the Knicks are really getting crushed is with Tyler Herro playing well previous to this, and also Duncan Robinson now from Williams College over to Michigan. He's playing unbelievable, and they can both shoot and stretch the floor, which gives Jimmy Butler more room to operate, Kyle Lowry more room to operate, and that's, I think, why they're doing better. When you get down to the bottom of their depth chart, I think they're better than the Knicks. Go to the Celtics and 76ers, I think you're going to find the same thing. Marcus Smart, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, Al Horford, Derek White sometimes, and you have Robert Williams III sometimes, depending upon the lineup that they're seeing. You have Malcolm Brogdon as the NBA sixth man of the year, and I think that's good. But after that, it really, really gets thin for the Celtics down on their bench. And so when you take a look at the 76ers, they're bringing, Georges Niang and Shake Milton off their bench. Not great coming off their bench, but their starters have been dominant. Harden, Embiid, and Maxey have been dominant. You have PJ Tucker, who's a tough player in there, and you also have Tobias Harris, who's a proven pro. I think that either one of these teams that run up against the Heat with the Heat's depth right now, I think they're going to run into trouble with that. Okay, so now we go over to the West Coast. We have the Nuggets and the Suns. Nuggets, you'll have Murray, Caldwell Pope, Michael Porter, Aaron Gordon, Nikola Jokic. That might be the best starting five in the entire NBA right there, NBA playoffs. Okay, when you go over to the Suns, they have Paul, who's been hurt, but he's going to come back. He was jogging on the sidelines the other day. You have Booker, Okogie, Durant, and DeAndre Ayton. That's a pretty good lineup as well, too. When you have Booker, Durant, and Andre Ayton, and with Chris Paul in there, that's unbelievable. But when you go to the bench for the Nuggets, they're bringing out Bruce Brown and Christian Braun. Christian Braun from Kansas, I always liked him, but he's not playing right now. He's not playing very well. Zeke Naji is very, very good for them off the bench. So I think they have the right amount of depth there. When you go over to the Suns, though, Landry Shamet and Jacques Landau have stepped out of nowhere. I would venture to say most people didn't even know their names when they went into this, and now they're playing unbelievable. And so the depth of the players coming off the bench for the Heat and the depth of the players coming off the bench for the Suns right now are the two most potent weapons that I see going on right now. The Lakers, okay, you have D'Angelo Russell, which was a huge pickup for them. Austin Reeves, I've talked about him a little bit. Great shooter, creates space for LeBron and for Anthony Davis, but just not a guy that I think on the defensive end that's going to be able to help them moving forward. They have LeBron, they have Anthony Davis. Now they bring Dennis Schroeder, and off the bench the other day, and I read the statement after the game that this young man made. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of the depth of it. If people want to look it up, it was from Lonnie Walker IV, former Miami Hurricane. Just say much love out to you, Lonnie. You're a courageous individual, and I have nothing but respect and admiration for your abilities, but also for your ability to fight through hard times and really make something wonderful of yourself. I think you're an outstanding human being, and I really did appreciate your message the other day. The Warriors, you go with Curry, Thompson, Wiggins, Green, and Looney. Get a little weak down at the end there with Green and Looney, not being true centers. But then you bring Poole, Dante DiVincenzo off your bench. I think that's pretty good. Here's what I mean by complementary players. There are some splits I want to read for you right now of the games that have had occurred recently, and I think that you'll see what I mean by when I say a split. I love players that show up in a lot of categories. So a split to me is you're going to be have a good scoring night, you're going to rebound the ball, and you're going to have a good assist night. Because scoring the ball is one thing, but basketball is about computer in the brain. Right? You make reads. You constantly make reads. And if you don't make the right read, that doesn't make you a good basketball player to me. And so if you make the right read, you're going to have some assists. There's times you're going to pass the ball. There's times you're going to be open to score. And also, I like guards that rebound. So listen to this split from Jalen Brunson the other night when the Knicks were facing elimination. 38 points, 9 rebounds, and 7 assists. Unbelievable split right there. He actually put the team on his back and carried them around for most of the night. What I say about the Warriors, I said we've had too much Curry. I think they heard me. I think there was too much Curry in the dish. It offset the flavor. I think they heard me. Also, a couple of different people around these young men got into their ear a little bit and said, hey, we really need you to step up in order to make the difference here. The two gentlemen that stepped up in an elimination game for the Warriors was Draymond Green and Wiggins. Wiggins was unbelievable in that game. He played great offensively, but he also guarded LeBron James and really, really gave him a tough time coming up and down the floor, slowing him down, making it more difficult for him to get into his looks and his reads. So Wiggins' split was 25 points, 7 rebounds, and 5 assists. That's a great split. He shot 55% from the floor, which means he's taking really good shots. It also means that he's now in a position where the coaches Coach Kerr and the other coaches are putting him in good position to score as well. So I think that's important. And then look at Draymond Green when he came out against the Lakers. If this continues, the Lakers are going to have a problem. Lakers have Game 6 coming home, but then if they don't get Game 6, they go back. And if this continues the way it goes with those two players playing at that high level and that third piece of Jordan Poole, who's been struggling a little bit, but he's mega talented, and if he starts getting hot, they could really start to go. So I think what you're having right now is really a great moment for the NBA. The playoffs have been really solid, really good. I just wanted to go back a little bit to some of the different things that we have with the recent, we talked earlier on, and I said to some people around the show, I said, you guys have been watching the show. I said, as we get into the summer, it's going to be a little bit more difficult, to talk basketball in depth, especially as soon as the NBA playoffs end.
Sure.
So we'll have to start to be a little creative, and we'll start to have to do things. And one of the things that came back to me was they said, why don't you talk a little bit more about the GOAT? He said, we talked about the GOAT. I think Larry Bird's the greatest basketball player of all time. And I think that for a number of different reasons. His ability to win, his ability to hit big shots, and his ability to impact the league in a really special way. I also think that what you have to encumber with some of the players that are playing in the new NBA, what I call the nouveau NBA, is that defense is basically not only not a thing, not most of the players aren't really interested in it. And until you get later into the playoffs, maybe you see a little bit of defense being played. But for the most of the year, there's not a lot of defense being played in the game. And I think that impacts the game. And I think it matters. And the ball gets shot so quickly in the NBA now with the 9 seconds, as a shot rate. I think that's way too quick. And I think that that's something that is impacting the game. I don't think the 24-second clock actually helped the NBA. I know there's a lot of people that like it, a lot of people that think, good stuff about it, but I just didn't really, think that there was a whole lot of time there in order to really, bring the ball over half court, get set up into a play, and then look at it from there and see what's your best read. Instead, they just come down the floor kind of blasting and moving the ball and spacing each other, and everybody that's open just kind of shoots the ball. Nobody really plays around the basket anymore. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar wouldn't even get the ball in this NBA.
Should the shot clock be instituted in the last 2 minutes of a quarter?
I could see that happen. I think the players in the NBA would shoot the ball quickly regardless. The reason the shot clock is there is
because again, that changed the game, right?
Yeah, and because of coaches, So some coaches back in the day decided it was a good idea to hold the ball. You're playing against Wilt Chamberlain, and you don't have a good chance to beat him, so let's hold the ball. And so the shot clock was implemented. It's something I go back to that I used to say when I was a younger man, is that something beautiful is not capable of success in the hands of fearful people. Something beautiful is not capable of ultimate success in the hands of fearful people. And the people who've had their hands on basketball have been driven much more by fear than they have been by love. And love of the game is what I mean. And so if you love the game of basketball, you don't want to see a charge line. You don't want to see a three-point line. You don't want to see a shot clock. You want to see the players play. And you want to see them play in the fashion that they used to. And so when you say we add all of these different things in, you're also tilting the paradigm. When players didn't play with the three-point shot, they didn't have the same ability to set records as LeBron James now, who owns the scoring record, and players back in the day didn't have the ability to use the three-point shot. I think the players today are great. I just think the model that they're set up in the NBA, and again, if you go on any of these YouTube and any of these places, you can find a number of different avenues where people make really good cases which say the NBA may not be as organic as everybody thinks it is. The NBA may not be this surprise model that they think it is. And if you go back in history and you look at some of the things, I know people call them conspiracy theories and things like that, but if you look at certain things, they will make you go, that will make you look at things a little differently. And if you really, really research them and look at them, you'll see that the NBA has been marketing itself as much as they've been operating as an NBA franchise. They've been marketing themselves as a corporation as much as they operate as a basketball league. And that's why you have as much going on with the league right now that people find distasteful. And I think it's hurt their ratings. I think it's hurt their rankings. You heard Phil Jackson come out, the great coach of the Chicago Bulls, and said he hasn't watched an NBA game in several years. And I think he got attacked for that, especially by Jalen Rose on television, who I like Jalen as a player, but I really don't understand why he's on television. I don't really see that he kind of operates only in one level, with his understanding, and that to me creates some problems,
But did they just try to follow the model of the NFL, and it's not the same league, and it just doesn't work in the NBA? They got to try something else.
I think they decided with a group of executives that they would be able to make the league more inviting and more fun. So in baseball, if you're a conspiracy theory, you think back in the day they juiced the ball.
Right.
Okay. Then you also, if you're a conspiracy theory, you think they juiced the players as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, there's a lot of information out there. You can make your own determinations about that. And people feel that that's unfair when that occurs because records are being set under those directives and they're
Correct.
being
Yes.
set in that way.
Yep.
It's like when you watch cyclists, and they had the great a great Armstrong guy. With the band, the cancer bands and all the other stuff, and that was great. And then they found out that he was juicing as well too.
Yep.
And if you listen to some of these MMA fighters, you think everybody's juicing there. There's talk about golfers that are juicing. There's talking about all sorts of athletes that are juicing, and if you're in the weightlifting in the weightlifting business, I mean that's just standard operating procedure.
Correct.
And so I think that tilts the paradigm a little bit. I think that puts us in an unfortunate situation. Just as when the NBA sat back and said we want to implement no hand check rule, we want to implement a 3-point shot that's 25 feet from the basket. We want to implement a 3-second defensive rule. We want to implement illegal defense. Okay, those were all things that they decided to do, just like in Major League Baseball when they juiced the ball, they juiced the players, and they lowered the strike zone down to the size of a pea hole in New York City that you can look at it. Okay? And so those three things that they wanted to see more home runs, they wanted to see more offense, they were wrong. They were wrong. People just want to see the sport. People just want to see the balance of it. They don't want to know that anybody's hands were involved in this. They don't want to know that there's some guy behind, the Wizard of Oz guy behind the screen that's pulling this stuff when they find this stuff to be exciting and hopefully organic. But when you go back and look at some of the different things that have occurred in sports in general and over time, you find that the marketing piece starts to tell you more of a narrative and a story rather than we're just in this for the sports. And when we get into the narrative piece of it, it's great. There's some unbelievable stories out there, some great basketball stories out there. But when we get into driving the narrative, when we get into, as the book is called, Jordan Rules, okay, when you watch LeBron James ask for a foul and the ref blows his whistle, that's when people have a problem with the league. When you see one of their players pick up the ball from half court, go all the way into the basket, and take like 6 steps and not be called for traveling, you have a tendency to lose your faith in what you're watching. You have a tendency to lose legitimacy.
The rules only apply to certain people.
Exactly. So you lose legitimacy. What does legitimacy mean? It means that the people that are watching, the people that are paying, they feel that this is a legitimate enterprise. It's the same thing with our government. When people feel legitimacy, they feel like they're being governed properly. They feel like they're being treated to a life that's full of freedom and democracy. Okay? The same thing is what people want in sports. They want freedom. They want democracy. They want to see the best team win. They don't care if it's a major market city that wins so the NBA gets paid. They don't care if it's an NIL deal that they just brought in for $2 million. I think the people of Kansas would rather see things done a little bit more organically. I think that people in the sports world would see things done more organically. And I think that's where they're losing. All of these executives in all of these different places have all of these different things. If you watch the Netflix series with that referee Danahy, who was taken out of the game for allegedly fixing games, he says he didn't fix any games of his own. What he said was he gave advice to people based upon referees he knew that didn't like coaches and didn't like players. And he said there's no way that this certain team will win a game 6 because this guy's going to do the game, and the NBA wants game 7. When you hear all those things and you add it all up, those conspiracy theories all of a sudden start to become what I call late truth. They become the truth later when it slides out. And so I think that that's what's happening in sports so much all over the place, and I think it's to detriment. I think if the NBA, NCAA want to get back to having the real excitement around their sport, having people really love and enjoy their sport, I think they'll get back to being a little bit more organic. What does that mean? What it means, especially in the NBA with salary cap, and now you can re-sign your own player. Let me give you an example. Jaylen Brown made All-Pro. That allows him to be signed for 5 years, $295 million by his own team.
Because
he's allowed to get
deal,
a max contract right now because he made All-NBA team. Okay? I think Jaylen Brown is doing great, but I think it also puts the Celtics in a very difficult situation when now you're going to have to max out somebody that probably isn't making that kind of money right now. And now that's going to affect the other players on your team. Just like an NIL deal when they decided to bring the young man back at Duke, Kyle Filipowski. He comes back to Duke, and then they wind up losing one of their big recruits, Mackenzie Mbako, because he doesn't feel like he's going to get the same deal there. And I don't know that they have unlimited amounts of money where they can just say, okay, $2 million for this guy. Next guy comes in, we got him at 1.5. Next guy comes in, we got him at $1 million. At some point, you would have to sit there and say, like when Coach Krzyzewski was the head coach at Duke, their entire coaching payroll was in the $11 million range. For the entire staff, it was in the $11 to $12 million range for coaching staff. Now you're going to sit there and you say you have $12 million invested in a coach. You have $12 million invested in the players. How can you say there's any return on investment? How can you say that you're actually getting something that's going to benefit the students of your university when there's actually no chance that that's occurring?
Right.
There's actually zero chance that that's occurring. That's the sad part about it. I think at the end of the day, you know, we talked about this with Coach Huggins. Life has inherent penalty. And so if people don't like your product anymore, if people don't appreciate what you're doing anymore, you're going to lose fans. You're going to lose base. And then you're going to have to make it up some other way. And then when you start scrambling and doing all that other stuff, the TV contracts aren't going to be as good as they are because not as many people are watching. And so it's this thing of how do you remain true to what you do and also have some benefit from it, also have some reward from it. But I think that it's important, you know, I hear you when you say you got picked on a lot as a kid. You know, and I grew up in New York, which was the most violent place that you've ever been in your life. And the words and the things that people said to each other, you know, that was, you know, and we got it. You know, that was just the way it was back then and everything. But don't we have a move to improve? I think we do. I think we can treat people better. I think we can be nice to people. And I certainly wouldn't want to come up to somebody and hurt their feelings in any different way because you can't make yourself feel better by tearing somebody else down.
That's absolutely true.
That's the one thing I wish people would start to understand. There's impossibility of trying to make yourself feel better by tearing somebody else down. In the essence of tearing somebody else down, what you're saying to the rest of us is you don't like yourself. That's what puzzled me so much about Coach Huggins. Successful coach, millionaire, almost 70 years of age, no involvement. No wanting to become a better person, you know, and that's where the money clouds things, because I think that I disagree with Charles Barkley 110%. They are role models, and our young people need role models, and our young people need to be around people that want them, point them north. Our people, our young people require that. So, Pete, I can't believe we're up, but time is up. I'm going to give you my 2 songs, Pete. All right? So we're going to go Going to California by Led Zeppelin.
Okay.
It's an awesome song. I love that song. And I think, you know, when you go back to the old stuff, when you go back to the old music, that stuff was unbelievable. And there's just so much of it that's there. And so I'm going to give you another one that I like, and it's by Carol Douglas. It's called Doctor's Orders. So going to California is an intense rock and roll song. Doctor's Orders. Get around your house with your significant other and start dancing. This is the end of In the Zone. This is week 9. I can't believe we've made it this far. I thank all of you for your interest, your questions, and when you get out there, use your ability to be nice to people. Use your ability to change the world for the better. And that's what I'm saying for the show today. Let's all take a little turn and move away from the operation in West Virginia. Let's make people feel good about themselves. It doesn't cost any money. In the Zone, Pete. I'll see you next week.